The small coastal town of Cedar Bay was known for its breathtaking sunsets and tight-knit community. Among the locals, Lily and Tom Carter were that couple everyone secretly envied. Not because they flaunted their happiness, quite the opposite. They carried their joy with a humble grace that made others believe true love really existed. Their story began in high school, where Tom was the quiet boy who loved the ocean more than parties, and Lily was the girl who always had her nose buried in a book. They weren't the most obvious match, but anyone who saw them together understood why they fit. They balanced each other perfectly, his calm steadiness complementing her enthusiastic spirit. After dating through college, they returned to Cedar Bay to build their life together. Tom pursued his passion as a marine biologist, spending his days studying the delicate ecosystem of the nearby waters. Lily turned her love of books into a charming bookstore called Tidal Pages, which quickly became the heart of the community. On rainy afternoons, neighbors would gather among the shelves, sipping tea and sharing stories while the sound of waves crashed against the shore outside. Their home was a cozy blue cottage on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but the walls held their laughter, their occasional arguments that never lasted more than a day, and their whispered dreams of the future. Every corner reflected their journey, photographs from hiking trips, shells collected during beach walks, and the handmade dining table Tom had built for their 5th anniversary. "Do you ever think about having kids?" Tom asked one evening as they sat on their porch swing, watching the sun melt into the horizon. His hand rested comfortably on Lily's, his wedding ring catching the last golden light of day. Lily squeezed his fingers. "I've been thinking about it more lately. Maybe it's time." The smile that spread across Tom's face was one she would carry in her memory forever, pure joy mixed with nervous excitement. They stayed up late that night, talking about names and nursery colors, imagining what their child might inherit from each of them. Their 10-year anniversary was approaching, and Lily had been planning a surprise. Tom had always wanted to visit the Galapagos Islands to see firsthand the place that inspired his love of marine biology. She had been saving for years, putting aside a portion of the bookstore profits each month. The tickets were hidden in her desk drawer at the shop, alongside a handmade card she'd been working on. Their friends often asked them the secret to their happiness. "There's no secret," Tom would say with a shrug. "We just choose each other every day." But Lily knew there was more to it than that. They had worked through tough times. The year the bookstore almost went under, the painful loss of Tom's father, their struggle to find their place in the world. What made their love special wasn't its perfection but its resilience. On a crisp autumn morning, Tom kissed Lily goodbye at their front door. He was heading out for what should have been a routine 3-day research expedition. "Don't forget we're having dinner with Raj and May on Saturday," Lily reminded him, adjusting the collar of his jacket. "I'll be back Friday afternoon," he promised. "Plenty of time to help you make that pasta thing they love." "I love you," she said, standing on tiptoes to kiss him one more time. "Stay safe out there." Tom grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when he was truly happy. "Always do. Love you too, Lil." She watched him walk down the path to his truck, turning once to wave before driving away. The morning light caught his hair, turning it golden for a moment. Lily didn't know it then, but this ordinary goodbye, one of hundreds they had shared over the years, would be the last image she would have of the life they had built together. That evening, as she closed the bookstore and walked home along the beach, Lily felt a strange chill despite the mild weather. Looking out at the darkening horizon, she had no way of knowing that miles away, storm clouds were gathering over calm waters, about to change everything. The weather forecast had promised clear skies and calm seas for the next 3 days. Tom and his research team of 4 had planned to track dolphin migration patterns just 15 miles offshore, a routine expedition they'd done countless times before. Their small research vessel, the Blue Horizon, was well equipped for the task, with state-of-the-art tracking equipment and enough supplies for a comfortable short trip. As the boat pulled away from the harbor that morning, Tom stood at the rail, feeling the familiar excitement of being on the water. He loved these trips, the salty air, the endless blue stretching to the horizon, the possibility of discovering something new about the ocean creatures he dedicated his life to understanding. "Looks like perfect conditions," said Dr. Nora Chen, the team's senior researcher, joining him at the rail. If we're lucky, we might spot that pod with the distinctive markings again. Back in Cedar Bay, Lily went about her day at the bookstore, helping customers find their next favorite read and unpacking a shipment of new releases. Around noon, she noticed dark clouds gathering in the distance but thought nothing of it. Spring weather was often unpredictable near the coast. Out at sea, the change came with frightening speed. What meteorologists would later call a microburst storm formed almost without warning. One minute, the team was recording data under partly cloudy skies. The next, they were battling winds that seemed to come from all directions at once. "Secure everything," Captain Pete shouted over the howling wind. "We need to head back to shore." Tom rushed to help tie down equipment as waves began crashing over the bow. The small vessel pitched violently in the suddenly churning sea. Rain came in horizontal sheets, reducing visibility to almost nothing. A massive wave hit the starboard side, tilting the boat at a dangerous angle. Tom grabbed the railing to keep from sliding across the deck, but the next wave came before the boat could recover. He heard splintering wood, felt the railing give way beneath his hands. And then nothing but cold water and darkness. In town, the storm reached the coast with unexpected fury. Lily closed the bookstore early and hurried home, worried about the power line swaying dangerously in the wind. She tried calling Tom's satellite phone but got no answer, not unusual during research work, but still unsettling given the weather. As evening fell, her phone rang. It was Harbor Master Wilson. "Mrs. Carter, I'm calling about the Blue Horizon. They've missed their scheduled check-in, and with this storm," his voice trailed off momentarily, "the Coast Guard has been notified. They're sending out a search vessel as soon as conditions permit." Lily's world narrowed to the sound of rain against the windows and the ticking of the clock Tom had fixed last month. She called their closest friends, who came immediately despite the weather. Nobody spoke the worst fears aloud, but they hung in the air like the storm clouds outside. At first light, when the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a deceptively beautiful clear sky, Lily drove to the harbor. Coast Guard officials had established a command post there. 2 other research team members' families were already waiting, faces drawn with the same fear she felt knotting her stomach. "We've received a distress signal from their emergency beacon," a Coast Guard officer explained. "Search teams are already on their way to the coordinates." Hours passed in a blur of coffee cups and hushed conversations. Lily stood at the edge of the dock, scanning the horizon as if she could will the rescue boats to appear. Just after noon, a Coast Guard vessel returned. From a distance, she could see figures on deck, but fewer than there should have been. Captain Pete and Dr. Chen had been found clinging to a piece of the boat's hull. Both were hypothermic and injured but alive. Tom and the team's youngest member, Andy, were missing. "The boat capsized," Captain Pete explained, his voice hollow with shock. One minute Tom and Andy were there, the next, he couldn't finish the sentence. For 3 days, search teams combed every inch of the possible drift area. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the water. Local fishing boats joined the search, everyone in Cedar Bay wanting to help find one of their own. On the 3rd day, as the sun began to set, Coast Guard Captain Rivera approached Lily where she stood on the beach, still watching the water. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently, removing his cap. "I'm so sorry. We're calling off the search." Lily stared at him, then back at the ocean, the same ocean Tom had loved so much, now transformed into something vast and terrible and final. No words came. How could such a perfect life dissolve so completely, without even leaving her the small mercy of a body to bury? As friends led her away from the shore, the only thought echoing through her mind was that she had forgotten to tell Tom where she'd hidden his anniversary present. People told Lily that the funeral was beautiful. She nodded and thanked them because that seemed to be what they needed, but she barely remembered any of it. The church had been packed. Tom had touched many lives in their small coastal town. Someone had arranged white lilies everywhere, and the sun had streamed through the stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns on the wooden floor. But these were just fragments she pieced together later from photographs and what others told her. "If you need anything at all, day or night, you call us," Tom's research partner Nora said, squeezing Lily's hand before leaving after the reception. Everyone said something similar, offering meals, help with the house, a shoulder to cry on. Lily appreciated their kindness, but what she needed most, Tom back, was the one thing nobody could give her. The paperwork felt never-ending and strangely cruel. Death certificates, insurance claims, the legal process of declaring someone dead without a body. Each form required her to relive the loss, to stamp it with official finality. The lawyer spoke gently as he explained about Tom's life insurance policy and the transfer of property titles. He planned well, he told her. You'll be financially secure. Lily nodded, thinking how strange it was that her husband's foresight, a quality she had always loved about him, now felt like his final act of care for her. Nights were the hardest. The cottage that had felt so perfect for them now seemed too big, too quiet, too full of empty spaces where Tom should be. She slept on the couch for nearly a month, unable to face their bed. When she finally did return to the bedroom, she slept on his side, her face pressed into his pillow that still held a faint trace of his scent. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered into the darkness one night, 3 months after the accident. "I don't know how to be just me anymore." As if in answer, the wind chimes Tom had hung on the porch tinkled softly, carried on a gentle breeze through the open window. The bookstore became her lifeline. While everything else had changed, the familiar routine of ordering inventory, arranging displays, and helping customers provided structure when she felt like she was drifting. Regular customers didn't know what to say at first, their awkward sympathy making her chest tighten, but gradually they returned to normal conversations about books and town gossip. "My nephew's thinking about studying marine biology at college," an elderly customer mentioned one afternoon, then froze, horrified she'd brought up a painful subject. "That's wonderful," Lily replied, surprising herself with her steady voice. "Tom always said it was the best career in the world. I have some of his favorite books on the subject if your nephew would like recommendations." It was a tiny moment, but something shifted. She realized she could speak about Tom without breaking apart completely. His memory didn't have to be locked away to protect her fragile heart. She developed habits that puzzled others but made perfect sense to her. She still bought his favorite cereal. She kept his voice on their answering machine. Sometimes, when closing the store, she would talk to him about her day as if he were walking beside her on the way home. A few times, customers overheard her and exchanged concerned glances, but Lily didn't care. These one-sided conversations helped her feel connected to him. 6 months after the accident, Lily faced their wedding anniversary. Friends invited her to dinner, trying to distract her, but she declined. Instead, she packed a small picnic and drove to the secluded beach where Tom had proposed years ago. The sun was setting as she spread a blanket on the sand. She poured 2 glasses of wine, one for her, one for Tom. From her bag, she pulled out the anniversary gift she'd never had the chance to give him: tickets to the Galapagos Islands and a handmade photo album documenting their years together. "I'm still angry with you sometimes," she said aloud, watching the waves. "For leaving. For making me figure out how to live without you." The wind carried her words away. "But mostly I'm grateful we had what we had. Some people never get that." She sipped her wine and opened the photo album, slowly turning pages filled with snapshots of their life together. Their first apartment with the leaky faucet. Hiking trips along the coast. Tom's proud grin when she opened the bookstore. Holiday gatherings with friends who had become family. As darkness fell, she closed the album and gazed at the stars emerging above the ocean. "I miss you," she whispered. "I'll always miss you. But I'm going to be okay." On her way home, Lily stopped by the bookstore to pick up an order that had arrived late. As she unlocked the door, she suddenly remembered Tom's watch, the one she'd given him on their wedding day that had been lost with him at sea. Somehow, amidst all the important things she'd been dealing with, she'd forgotten about it until now. The thought of it sitting at the bottom of the ocean, still marking time even though Tom no longer could, brought fresh tears. But as she switched on the lights of the empty store, surrounded by thousands of stories on the shelves around her, Lily felt something she hadn't in months. A quiet certainty that somehow, someday, she would find a way to write the next chapter of her own story. 2 years passed like the tides, sometimes rushing forward, sometimes pulling back, but always moving. The sharp edges of Lily's grief had softened into something she could carry without being cut by it every time she moved. There were still hard days, Tom's birthday, the anniversary of the accident, but they no longer knocked her completely off balance. The bookstore had become more than just her livelihood. It was her way of connecting with the world again. 6 months ago, she'd expanded into the empty space next door, adding a small coffee bar and cozy seating areas. Title pages and brews quickly became the heart of Cedar Bay, hosting book clubs, poetry readings, and community meetings. "Tom would have loved what you've done with this place," said Ben Harrison one morning as he helped her arrange chairs for an author event. Ben taught English at the local high school and had been one of Tom's closest friends. In the early days after the accident, he'd stopped by often to check on her, fix things around the house that Tom would have handled, or simply sit quietly with her when talking felt impossible. Lily smiled, running her hand along a bookshelf Tom had built years ago. He would have complained about the coffee smell getting into the books. "And then drunk 3 cups while reading in that corner," Ben added, pointing to the window seat that had become a favorite spot for customers. Their shared memories of Tom had once been painful, but now brought comfort. Ben understood her loss in a way others couldn't. He never expected her to be over it or pushed her to date again like some well-meaning friends did. When the town's summer festival committee asked Lily to coordinate the book fair portion of the event, she hesitated. It meant long hours of planning on top of running the store. She'd avoided big community events since Tom died, finding the cheerfulness overwhelming. "I'll help," Ben offered when she mentioned it during one of their now regular coffee chats. "Between the two of us, we could make it something special." They worked side by side for weeks, staying late at the bookstore to plan author visits and children's activities. One night, after finalizing the schedule, Ben brought out a bottle of wine he hidden behind the counter. "To celebrate," he explained, pouring 2 glasses. "The fair's going to be great." Lily took a sip, watching him over the rim of her glass. When had Ben's presence become so comfortable, so expected? She couldn't pinpoint the moment their friendship had shifted into something she looked forward to each day. The book fair was a success, bringing visitors from neighboring towns. As they packed up on the final evening, exhausted but pleased, Ben turned to her. "Would you like to get dinner sometime? Not here, not working. Just dinner." His hesitation made her realize he was nervous, and suddenly so was she. This wasn't just a friendly meal he was suggesting. "Ben, She started, then stopped, not sure what she wanted to say. "It's okay if you're not ready," he said quickly. "Our friendship is the most important thing. I don't want to risk that." Lily looked at him, really looked at him. Ben with his kind eyes and patient smile. Ben who knew all about Tom, who never tried to replace those memories, who had become a steady presence in her life. "Thursday," she suggested, surprising herself. The restaurant on the pier. The smile that spread across his face made her heart flutter in a way it hadn't in years. Their first date was awkward in moments, both of them suddenly self-conscious after years of easy friendship. But by dessert, they'd found their rhythm again, laughing about the disaster that was the poetry slam night at the bookstore. Walking her home, Ben stopped at her gate rather than coming to the door as he usually would. The line between friendship and something more suddenly felt significant. "Thank you for tonight," he said softly. "It was nice," she replied, meaning it. Different but nice. When he leaned in to kiss her cheek, Lily turned slightly, their lips meeting briefly instead. The simple contact sent warmth through her that was both thrilling and terrifying. That night, as she got ready for bed, Lily caught herself talking to Tom, as she sometimes still did. "I had a date tonight," she said to the empty room. "With Ben. You'd probably tease me about it." She paused, touching the framed photo of Tom on her dresser. "But I think you'd be okay with it too. You always liked Ben." For the first time, she moved the photo from her bedside table to the dresser. Not putting it away, just making space for what might come next. 5 years had passed since the day the Coast Guard called off the search for Tom. 5 years of learning how to carry grief alongside joy, of rebuilding a life different from the one Lily had planned, but still worth living. Her relationship with Ben had grown slowly, thoughtfully, neither of them rushing what they both recognized as something precious and unexpected. After dating for 2 years, he'd moved into her cottage, bringing his collection of classic novels and jazz records that now mingled with her things and the memories of Tom that still lived in the house. "I've been thinking," Ben said one morning as they sat on the porch swing, watching the sunrise over the ocean. This had become their ritual: coffee and quiet conversation before the day began. "What would you think about moving?" Lally looked at him, surprised. "Moving? From Cedar Bay?" "No, not from town," he clarified quickly. "Just a different house. One that's ours together, not just mine living in yours." She understood what he wasn't saying directly. This cottage held Tom in every corner: the bookshelves he'd built, the garden he'd planted, the bedroom they'd shared. While Ben never complained, Lily sometimes caught him looking at old photographs with an expression that made her heart ache. "I think I'd like that," she said, realizing as the words left her mouth that she meant them. "Somewhere with a garden still, though." "And ocean views," Ben added, smiling. "I know how much you love them." But his suggestion stirred something else, something Lily had been considering for months, but hadn't found the courage to bring up. "Ben," she said, setting down her coffee cup, "before we talk about houses, there's something I want to ask you." He turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. "What would you think about getting married?" The surprise on his face made her laugh. I know, usually the guy asks. But I've been thinking about it, and, well, life's too short to wait for the perfect moment, isn't it?" Ben's surprise melted into a smile that lit up his entire face. "Are you sure?" "I am," she said, and the certainty in her voice surprised even her. "I love our life together. I want to make it official." He took her hands in his. "Nothing would make me happier." They decided on a small ceremony in the bookstore, surrounded only by close friends and family. Lily wore a simple blue dress, the color of the ocean, the color of Tom's eyes. It wasn't a choice meant to honor her first husband on her second wedding day, but it felt right somehow, an acknowledgement that her past was part of who she was now. The week before the wedding, Lily met with a lawyer to sort out some final paperwork. Though Tom had been declared legally dead years ago, there were still matters to resolve before she could change her name. "You'll need to sign these," the lawyer said, sliding documents across his desk. "Since you're choosing to take Mr. Harrison's name, we need to update your legal status." Lily hesitated, pen hovering over the signature line. "Actually, I'm keeping Carter professionally, for the bookstore. It's how people know me. But legally, I'll be Lily Harrison." It was a bridge between her two lives, a way to honor both. The night before their wedding, Ben stayed at his old apartment, a nod to tradition that had made them both laugh, given that they'd lived together for over a year. Alone in the cottage, Lily found herself drawn to the box in her closet that held the few things of Tom's she'd kept: his favorite sweater, now worn thin at the elbows, the well-thumbed field guide to marine life he'd carried everywhere, the anniversary gift she'd never given him. She sat on the floor, holding the sweater against her cheek one last time. Tomorrow, she would become someone's wife again, a reality that once seemed impossible. The thought brought tears, but they weren't entirely sad ones. "I'm getting married tomorrow," she whispered, as if Tom could hear her. To Ben, "He makes me happy, Tom. Different from you, but real. I think you'd be glad about that." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Lily's friend May helped her with her hair, weaving small white flowers through her curls. "You look beautiful," May said, stepping back to admire her work. "And happy, really happy." "I am," Lily replied, and found the words to be completely true. The bookstore had been transformed with twinkling lights and fresh flowers. As Lily walked between the bookshelves toward Ben waiting by the window that overlooked the harbor, she felt a strange sense of everything coming full circle. This place that had saved her during her darkest days was now witnessing her brightest new beginning. When they exchanged vows, Ben's voice steady and sure as he promised to cherish her, Lily felt the last piece of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving fall into place. This wasn't the life she had planned, but it was beautiful in its own unexpected way. Later, as they danced among their friends in the small space cleared between bookshelves, Ben whispered in her ear, "I've been saving up for something." "A honeymoon? I was thinking maybe Australia?" Lily looked up at him, surprised. "Australia? That's—" "I know it's not exactly the Galapagos," he said softly, "but I thought maybe we could make our own adventure." She kissed him then, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. He knew about the tickets she'd never used, the dream trip with Tom that never happened. Now he was offering not a replacement, but a new dream altogether. "Australia sounds perfect," she said. When do we leave? The call came 3 days before Lily and Ben were set to leave for Australia. Lily was at the bookstore, finalizing arrangements with her assistant who would manage things while they were gone. When her phone rang with an unfamiliar international number, she almost didn't answer, assuming it was a sales call. "Hello," she said, distracted as she checked inventory on her computer. "Am I speaking with Lily Carter?" The woman's voice had a slight accent Lily couldn't place. "Yes, that's me. My name is Dr. Isabel Vega. I'm calling from San Vicente Regional Hospital in Chile." The woman paused. "This may sound incredible, but we believe we have your husband here." Lily's hand froze on the keyboard. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. My husband is with me in Cedar Bay." "Not Mr. Harrison," the doctor said gently. "I'm referring to Thomas Carter." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Lily gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Tom died 6 years ago." "Perhaps it would be best if I explained," Dr. Vega continued. "A man was brought to our hospital 2 weeks ago after suffering a fall on a fishing boat. The injury triggered a seizure, which appears to have unlocked memories that had been inaccessible to him for years. He had been living in a small fishing village about 200 miles south of here, going by the name Miguel. The fishermen who found him after the shipwreck assumed he was one of their own, perhaps from another village." Lily sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. "This can't be real." "He had a photo, Miss Carter, water-damaged but still recognizable." "Of you." A cold wave washed over Lily. Tom had always carried a photo of her in his wallet, taken on their honeymoon, her laughing on the beach with the sunset behind her. "We've run DNA tests," the doctor continued. "We matched it against samples from the research project he was working on before his disappearance. It's conclusive. This man is Thomas Carter." The next hours passed in a blur. Lily called Ben, her voice shaking so badly he rushed to the store thinking she was ill. When she told him, he sat beside her in stunned silence, holding her hand as they listened to Dr. Vega explain more on speakerphone. Tom had survived the capsizing by clinging to debris. A Chilean fishing boat had found him, unconscious and severely injured. The trauma to his head had caused extensive amnesia. With no identification and no memory of who he was, the fishermen had taken him to their village, where he had gradually learned their language and way of life. For nearly 6 years, he had lived as Miguel, working on the boats, experiencing occasional flashes of memory, a bookstore, the sound of a woman's laugh, the name Lily, but nothing concrete enough to understand who he had been. The fall from the boat deck 2 weeks earlier had somehow jarred his brain, triggering the seizure that began unlocking his memories. As fragments returned, Cedar Bay, his research work, Lily's face, he had become increasingly agitated, insisting he needed to find someone. A local doctor had referred him to the regional hospital, where Dr. Vega recognized the signs of returning memory in an amnesia patient. How is he? Lily finally managed to ask. "Physically, he's recovering well from the fall. Mentally, it's more complicated. His memories are returning in pieces. He remembers you clearly and your life together, but there are significant gaps. He doesn't remember the accident itself. Some memories may never return." "Can I speak to him?" Lily's voice was barely audible. There was a pause, then rustling sounds as the phone changed hands. "Lily?" The voice was raspy, lower than she remembered, with a slight accent now, but unmistakably Tom's. Something between a sob and a laugh escaped her. "Tom, is it really you?" "They tell me that's my name," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice despite the uncertainty. "I've been dreaming about you for years. Your face, your voice. I just didn't know who you were." Tears streamed down Lily's face. Ben had moved away, giving her privacy, but she could see him through the office window, his face pale as he stared unseeing at the bookshelves. "I'm coming," she said to Tom. "I'm getting on the first plane I can find." 26 hours later, after flights that seemed endless and a drive along coastal roads that twisted like her churning thoughts, Lily arrived at the hospital in San Vicente. Dr. Vega met her in the lobby, explaining that Tom had been prepared for her visit but might be overwhelmed. His emotions can be unpredictable as memories return. Sometimes he's the man you knew, sometimes he's still partly Miguel. Lily nodded, barely hearing the words over the pounding of her heart. The doctor led her down a hallway to a small private room and knocked gently before opening the door. The man sitting by the window turned, and time seemed to stop. He was thinner, weathered by sun and sea, with scars on his arms she didn't recognize and streaks of gray in his hair that hadn't been there before. But his eyes, those were exactly as she remembered, the same clear blue of a summer sky. "Tom," she whispered, frozen in the doorway. He stood slowly, uncertainty and wonder babbling on his face. "Lily." She crossed the room in 3 steps and reached for his hand, needing to touch him to believe he was real. His fingers closed around hers, calloused now in different places, but still somehow familiar. "They told me it's been 6 years," he said, his voice breaking. They said I was declared dead." Lily nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for not finding my way back to you sooner." And then she was in his arms, both of them crying, the miracle and tragedy of their situation crashing over them like waves. He was alive, impossibly, wonderfully alive. But the 6 years between them couldn't be erased, couldn't be unlived. "I kept talking to you," she told him through tears. "All this time, as if you could hear me." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands gently framing her cheeks. "Maybe that's why I never completely forgot you. Maybe some part of me was listening." Lily spent 2 weeks in Chile, helping Tom navigate his recovery and the complicated process of reclaiming his identity. Each day brought new challenges as his memories continued to return in unpredictable waves. Sometimes he'd remember entire vacations they'd taken together. Other times, he'd struggle to recall the name of the street they'd lived on. The doctors called it patchy amnesia and couldn't predict which memories might return and which were lost forever. What remained unshaken was his love for her, a feeling he described as the anchor that had kept part of him tethered to his true self, even during the years he'd lived as Miguel. "Even when I didn't know your name, I dreamed about your smile," he told her one afternoon as they sat in the hospital garden. "The fishermen thought I was lovesick for someone back home. They weren't wrong." Lily held his hand, still marveling at the miracle of touching him again. But as Tom grew stronger, the question they'd both been avoiding loomed larger. "You've built a new life," Tom said finally, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Dr. Vega told me about Ben." Lily's throat tightened. "Yes." "Tell me about him," Tom said softly. She hesitated, then began slowly. She told him how Ben had been a friend first, how he'd helped her through the darkest days after losing Tom, how their relationship had evolved gradually into something neither had expected. She explained about the bookstore expansion, their cottage by the shore, the wedding just weeks ago. Tom listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When she finished, silence stretched between them. "He sounds like a good man," Tom said finally. "He is," Lily whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He is a good man." "And you love him?" It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes, I do." Tom nodded, looking down at their intertwined fingers. "I'm glad you weren't alone all this time, that you found happiness again." "But I still love you too," she said, the impossible truth of their situation hanging between them. "I never stopped." Back in their hotel room that night, Lily called Ben as she had each evening. These calls had grown increasingly difficult, stilted and heavy with unspoken fears. "The doctors say he's well enough to travel soon," she told him. "We're working on emergency passport documents." "Will you be bringing him home?" Ben asked, the word clearly painful for him to say. "I don't know," Lily admitted. "I don't know what home means anymore." When she hung up, she sat alone in the darkness, overwhelmed by the impossible choice before her. How could she choose between 2 good men who both loved her, whom she loved in different but equally real ways? There was no villain in this story, no easy answer. A week later, Lily and Tom returned to Cedar Bay. The small airport buzzed with whispers as people recognized the man who had literally returned from the dead. News had spread quickly through the tight-knit community, and despite Lily's pleas for privacy, several reporters waited with cameras. Tom gripped her hand tightly, overwhelmed by the attention and the flood of memories triggered by seeing familiar landmarks. "It's smaller than I remembered," he murmured as they drove through town. Ben had offered to stay with a friend while they sorted things out, but Lily had insisted on getting a hotel room for Tom instead. "This situation is impossible for everyone," she told him. "But running away from each other won't solve anything." The three of them met for the first time at the bookstore after hours, away from curious eyes. The moment Ben and Tom shook hands, the surreal nature of the situation struck Lily anew. Her past and present collided in these two men standing face to face, one who had shared her youth and shaped who she'd become, the other who had helped her rebuild from devastation and showed her she could love again. "Thank you for taking care of her," Tom said simply. "She took care of me too," Ben replied, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. In the days that followed, Lily felt pulled in two directions. With Tom, she visited their old favorite places, helping him reconnect with the life he'd lost. His medical team had warned that familiar surroundings might accelerate his memory recovery, and they were right. Each day, more pieces of the past clicked into place for him. With Ben, she shared quiet evenings at home, both of them trying to maintain some normalcy while acknowledging nothing would ever be the same. He never pressured her, never made demands, but she could see the fear in his eyes. Fear of losing everything they'd built together. "I wouldn't blame you if you chose him," Ben said one night as they sat on their porch swing. "He's your miracle." Lily took his hand. "You're my miracle too, just a different kind." As weeks passed, the media attention intensified. A producer from a national news program offered a substantial sum for exclusive rights to their story. Lily refused, but the constant scrutiny added another layer of pressure to an already impossible situation. Tom found temporary work at the Marine Research Center, where he'd once been a leading scientist. Though his memories of specific research were spotty, his knowledge of ocean life remained intact. Being back on the water brought him joy she remembered well from their earlier life together. The night Lily realized what she had to do, she was alone in the bookstore. Both men had given her space, understanding her need to think. She sat among the shelves that had witnessed so much of her life, her early days with Tom, her darkest grief, her healing with Ben, and now this impossible crossroads. She realized that her choice wasn't really about which man to choose, it was about which woman she had become. The Lily who had loved Tom with the fresh passion of youth was not the same Lily who had built a more mature, steady love with Ben. Both were real, both were her, but she couldn't split herself in half. The next morning, she asked both men to meet her at the beach where Tom had proposed to her all those years ago. They stood awkwardly in the early morning light, three good people caught in a story with no perfect ending. "I've made a decision," Lily said, her voice stronger than she felt. "But first I want you both to know that I love you. That's never been in question. What I struggled with is who I am now, and what path is truly right for all of us." She turned to Tom, taking his hands in hers. "You were my first love, my foundation. Losing you nearly destroyed me. Finding you again is the miracle I never dared to hope for." She paused, tears filling her eyes. "But the woman who loved you then doesn't exist anymore. She changed when she lost you. The person I am now belongs with Ben," Tom finished for her, his voice gentle. "I know, Lily. I think I've known since I came back." She looked at him in surprise. "The way you look at him," Tom explained with a sad smile. "It's how you used to look at me. That kind of love can't be denied. And it shouldn't be." Ben stood silently, his face showing disbelief. "Are you sure?" Lily asked Tom, searching his eyes for any doubt. "No," he admitted with honesty that made her heart ache. "But I'm sure I want you to be happy. And I'm sure I need to find out who I am now too. Miguel changed me just as losing me changed you." 3 months later, Lily and Ben renewed their vows in a small ceremony on the beach. Tom attended, standing beside his former research partner Nora, with whom he'd reconnected both professionally and personally. The arrangement wasn't perfect. Holidays could be awkward, and sometimes Lily still found herself wondering about what might have been, but it was honest and born of love rather than obligation. Life had taught Lily that there are no perfect endings, only new beginnings disguised as impossible choices. Sometimes the miracle isn't getting everything you thought you wanted, but finding the courage to embrace what's right in front of you, and the wisdom to recognize that every love, every loss, every return shapes the story that is uniquely yours.